Ask Reddit. What was the most shocking deathbed confession you've ever heard? Number 1. Wasn't deathbed, but my grandma told us that her dad and uncles murdered the man who abused her and disposed of the body. She waited until after they all passed away to tell people. Number 2. My grandfather looked at me when I was 16 and apologized for the abuse he committed against my mother when she was a child. Still messes with me to this day that he did that and thought I'd be the person to forgive him. Number 3. My mother started confessing to killing her friend when she was a teenager. She had been senile for about a year and usually didn't talk much, but she was speaking directly and clearly. Her story was very detailed, and we were just sitting there horrified. A few hours later, she was back in a more sedated state, and someone figured out it was the plot of a book by an author she loved. I don't know how much she was aware of anything at that point. She died early the next morning, but she would have absolutely laughed her ass off if she knew what she did to us. Number 4. A nurse once shared that an old man confessed to sabotaging his brother's parachute during World War II because they were in love with the same woman. His brother died, and the woman married someone else anyway. He said he lived with the guilt every single day. Number 5. Not really anything compared to murders, and not really a confession. But the day my great-grandfather died, he asked me to retrieve a suitcase from under his bed and throw it away. It was full of adult content-related items. He was 98, so good for him, but also I wish I had just thrown it away. Number 6. Not quite a confession, but near the end of my mom's life, she asked, "Where are my boys?" My twin, and I thought she meant girls, so we told her we were there. After she died, the day before the funeral, we got a call from a PI asking if they could speak to my mom. I told them she had just passed away, and the PI shared that they represented a client looking for their biological mother. I was seriously thinking it was someone that somehow heard my mom had passed and was trying to get money. At the time, I was grieving, so it seemed that plausible. I decided to hear her out, and she was absolutely describing my mother and parts of her life that no scammer would have known. Come to find out, our mother had 2 boys from 2 different men prior to marrying our father. One of the men was from her hometown, the other was from Japan. So much of her life before our dad was an enigma suddenly. Both her sisters had Alzheimer's, so no information was ever shared with us. Number 7. I watched a video, and this super old granny in Alaska talked about how she killed her abusive husband in Tennessee or wherever. So she thought about it for months, was abused during and before that. Then she asked him to fix something up high in the barn, hid some rakes under hay, and straight up pushed the ladder and made him fall on the rakes, killing him. Number 8. Not really a deathbed confession, but I was working in a hospital geriatric ward, and I walked into the room of an older, ill woman who immediately confided in me that she didn't have a vagina, but was married for 35 years and kept her husband very happy. That always stuck with me. I really didn't know how to respond. Maybe her intent was to get me to remember her. Number 9. It's nowhere near the level of what some of these are, but growing up, my mother and grandmother had always been very estranged. They had an arm's-length relationship, and the only times we visited were generally a disaster. But to her credit, my mom tried and wanted me to have a grandmother and the memories that came with it. She tried her best, but something was very off. Small details trickled out over the years, but they were vague. When it was time for my grandmother to die, I remember on her deathbed, she told me right before she passed, "Tell your mother, I always really loved her despite everything." That was a strange thing for her to say, because why would that have been something she needed to say? I didn't tell my mom right away, because after my grandmother died, she was oddly emotionless, and I felt like it was not something my mom needed to hear just then. A few years later, the truth came out when we were talking over the phone. My mom told me that when she was 5, my grandmother tried to run her over with a car because she found out her affair partner was abusing my mother. She wanted to get rid of her. It didn't work because a neighbor saw and intervened. So my mom ended up getting sent overseas to her father's mother's home to be safe while that got dealt with and my grandparents got divorced. Times being what they were, however, when my mom returned, her mother got custody of her. It ended up with my mother running away, being homeless, getting pregnant very young by a much older man, a secret sister I never knew about, and I was pretty floored. When she told me, I figured that it made a little more sense why my grandmother had said that, so I shared that with my mother finally. She just said, well, she had a strange way of showing it, and that was that. Number 10. Had an 80-year-old something patient tell me when his wife was dying, she admitted to having multiple affairs throughout their long-ass 60-year marriage. She went as far to say she never loved him, and his only son wasn't his. Number 11. My grandma is almost 90. She had several brothers and sisters. All of them have blonde hair and blue eyes. She has brown hair and brown eyes and a slightly darker skin tone. On my great-grandma's deathbed, she said, "I need to tell you something. When I was younger, I had an affair with a Cherokee man. My grandma had already pieced this together long ago. She always told me that she was half Cherokee. Anyways, a couple years ago, my dad did this genealogy kit from Ancestors.com. 0% Native American. I was told not to tell Grandma. Number 12. My gran was on her deathbed and was convinced she was going to hell because she stole money from the church rectory 50 years earlier to help feed her 10 young children. I think Gran's saying that was more upsetting to my aunts than her actual death. Not because of the stealing, because we all agree that a decent God wouldn't care when someone stole to feed children, but just how adamant Gran was that she was going to hell because of it. Made for some drama before she passed, for sure. Rest in peace, Grandma. Number 13. I worked as an MRI tech aide in college, and my job was simply to bring people to and from their hospital room for an MRI. One day, I was asked to get this nice, elderly, big Italian man. He was a big human, think 6 feet 4 inches, 260 pounds. I would have placed him in his early 70s, and he sadly had early onset dementia. We had short but nice chats on the way to and from the MRI. On the way back to his room, he told me how he was the guy called when his buddies needed to take care of business. I believe my naive response was something along the lines of, what kind of business were your buddies in? All kinds, but they would call him when they needed to take of a guy. So that's when I got what he was saying. I chuckled to myself, attributed it to the dementia as we got back to his room. When we got back to his room, his 3 kids and spouses, ranging 40 to 50-ish, were all there waiting on him. You could tell they were saddened by the condition of their father, but nevertheless were kind and smiled at me as I began getting him hooked back up to his O2 and heart monitors. One of his daughters asked how he's been. The gentleman said he was feeling okay, and he had just gotten back from getting an MRI with me. It was that moment that he said to his family, very nonchalantly, "Yeah, I was just telling this young man how I used to take care of business back in the day." It was at that moment all 6 faces turned somber in unison and turned and looked at me. I say, well, yes. What a great story. Well, have a nice day, everyone. Dash, in the most cheerful voice I could muster. Never mention a word. Don't even remember the gentleman's name, which is probably for the best. Number 14. My great-grandmother told me that our family had built the aqueducts in Spain, but many years ago, cousins of ours stole our fortune, and anyone from our family that went to claim it has disappeared. Number 15. Not a deathbed confession, but when my aunt was a college student in the late 1960s, she applied for a grant to study ecology in Borneo. She delayed accepting her fiancé's proposal while she waited for an answer. She waited and waited and waited. My grandmother, who was a huge fan of my aunt's fiancé, worried that the relationship wouldn't survive if she took off to Borneo for a year. She was incredibly relieved when my aunt took the radio silence as a rejection and accepted his proposal. Decades later, living a happy life with a successful husband and 3 high-achieving daughters, my aunt mentioned something about the time she wanted to study in Borneo. That was when my grandmother told her the day before the wedding an envelope came to my grandparents' house telling my aunt her grant application had been approved. Concerned she would spoil her future, my grandmother threw the envelope in the trash. Number 16. My maternal grandfather apparently confessed that he saw the ghost of his daughter, who had died a few years prior, the day before he had a major heart attack that took his life. It came to light that he had abused her as a child, and my grandmother basically knew and did nothing to protect her kids. The revelation imploded my family, but not until nearly 20 years after he died. Crazy stuff. Number 17. We thought MG Granny was dying. The hospital has asked us all, my mom and my brother and sister, to come and say goodbye. We are going one by one with my mom, and one of the things that my granny keeps bringing up is that she's sad for me, as I'm single and won't be having any naughties. Good to know where her priorities were when she was about to die. Number 18. Not quite deathbed. My grandfather was recovering from hospice. He was in the hospital and was talking to my grandma and me. He was pretty out of it and had this conversation with my grandma. When I get out of here, we're getting a hotel. She asked, "Why, honey?" And he said, "So we can have hot, wild sex." The man was 86. I was like, okay, I'm going to go get a soda. Number 19. I used to care for people who were disabled in some way in their homes. One man I cared for was elderly, over 80 years old, and just needed help with the day-to-day things like cooking and cleaning, driving places, etc. He was a perverted guy and always had something to say to the ladies. Some cognitive issues, with impulse control being the main thing he lacked, which led to lots of inappropriate comments to women, theft from stores, and random fast walks that he needed to be redirected go back to the house. One evening, we were sitting on his porch, and he asked me what the date was. After I told him, he was very emotional and sad, and shared it was the day he lost his family. I knew he had no family who visited or cared for him, and that he had been being cared for by agencies for decades. I saw the obituaries he had hanging in the house, and only one mentioned him as a survivor. It was clear the family stopped including him when he was young. He confessed that when he was a teenager, he touched his little sister. When she told, he strangled her until she passed away. He shared details of how he buried her under a sign next to the road. He described the dress she was wearing and how Mommy was never the same and Daddy tried to kill me when they found her. I'll never know for certain if it was a false memory from his cognitive decline or if he confessed the reason he had no family in his life and was not mentioned in any of the obituaries of his parents and siblings, and only in the one of his grandmother. But I will say I believed him as he was telling me. It felt different than any other of his stories that you knew were probably not true or exaggerated. He passed away a couple weeks later. Number 20. When my country was suffering a civil war, one little girl, around 6 years old, who lived near my grandmother, got bit by a dog with rabies. They could not vaccinate her, and the girl started to show symptoms. As the disease is deadly in this stage, the doctor and the family decided that the most humane solution was to mercy kill her. My grandmother, who was a teenager then, still remembered that the whole family was crying while walking down the street to the doctor's office. The father was holding the little girl, and she was trying to eat bread, but could not swallow it and had a little bit of foam in the corners of her mouth. She was haunted by the little girl's story her whole life. Number 21. My patient told me to tell her daughter she was right the whole time, so when she came in, I did. The patient had just passed. The daughter stared at me and became upset and yelled that I was lying, so I just stood quiet and left the room. Apparently, the lady wasn't her biological mom, and she had kidnapped her. The daughter did a 23andMe and found out about some relatives, and the mom never admitted it. I wish I could have found out more. Number 22. My ex's grandmother told me that she hit someone with her car and kept driving thinking they were an animal, later finding out that one of her friend's husbands was walking home drunk after spending time with a buddy, was hit by a car, and it was most likely him. He recovered but was permanently messed up and had issues walking and pain for the rest of his life. No one believed me when I told them she said that. Number 23. A few years ago, my mom knew a woman who was diagnosed with late-stage cancer. Before she passed away, she made a shocking confession to her husband. She told him that all 3 of their sons were not his biological children. Their real father was actually her own father. The boys were around 10, 8, and 7 years old at the time. After she died, the husband had DNA tests done, which confirmed that he was not the biological father. The tests also showed that the boy's biological father was indeed their maternal grandfather. The woman's father, who was in his 70s, was arrested and later sent to prison, where he eventually died. Despite learning the truth, the husband decided to raise the boys as his own. He said he had noticed early on that there was something different about them. For example, they didn't seem to feel pain the way other children did. At the time, he didn't think much of it, but looking back, it stood out more clearly. Number 24. Some of my mother's last coherent words were to tell me that me and my life choices were the reasons that she didn't want to fight to stay alive. She was going to die because I didn't make the choices that she felt were worth living for. Number 25. My wife, a geriatrician, told me this story. She had a patient who was considered just the loveliest by all those who knew her and all of her children. Now her children and their families are also successful individuals. Lawyer, doctor, university dean, etc. A group of very neatly presented people, if you know what I mean. As the matriarch's dementia worsened, she began having extremely violent hallucinations and began sharing unfiltered tales of great violence. The family was very confused, but after she died, the oldest son explained to his siblings that Mum was actually taken as a young teen in East London by a gang leader and was forced into being his wife for many years. Throughout this ordeal, she actually studied and learned how to be a gangster and eventually found herself influential enough to stage a coup against him, take all of his money and his gang. She then escaped to another country with the money to start over and managed to lead and nurture a life of privilege for herself and for generations to come. I admire this woman greatly. Number 26. I work as an ER nurse, and a couple months ago, there was a massive crash on the highway with around 20 cars. It was apparently a mystery who caused it, but because so many people were hurt and people didn't know whose fault it was, they didn't know whose insurance was going to pay for everything. Because the treatments were super expensive, for many of the patients, most insurances would only partially cover the bills. There was one older man who was in the car with his wife, and his wife died on impact. In his last moments, he told me to put the blame on him, to tell everyone he confessed to causing the crash. He did it because his insurance was top tier and he knew it would help people. Not very disturbing, but I think it's pretty interesting. Number 27. Now, I'm not sure if I've got this 100% right, because it's third hand and sorry if it's not exactly disturbing, but one of my aunt's friends suddenly got told she had 3 months to live. Loads of people were visiting her in hospital, and of course, so did her best friend. Once they were alone, as she lay in her hospital bed, she asked her best friend to close the curtains. She asked her friend to sit down and said she had something to tell her. The friend was confused, but listened closely. The lady in her bed proceeded to tell her best friend that she had an affair with her husband for over 30 years and that they were still seeing each other now. She begged for forgiveness and said she had to get that off her chest before she died. The friend apparently didn't say a word and left the room. Moments later, a doctor came in and told the lady in the bed that they'd mixed her papers up with another patient and that she's got the all clear and free to go home. Number 28. We had an old family friend who was dying of cancer. He had always been madly in love with my mother, but it never ended up working out. My brother went to visit him in the hospital, and he motioned for my brother to come closer. And then he said quietly, "Your mother was one of this city's most legendary drug dealers." Number 29. My grandpa told me on his deathbed that he was a hitman and made me promise not to do the same. I wasn't considering that line of work at all. Number 30. My grandfather was kicked in the crotch by a cow as a teenager. Later, he found out he was infertile, but waited until after the arranged marriage with my grandmother was a done deal before telling anyone on her side of the family. Turns out he had another marriage proposal fall through when he shared that little tidbit too soon. Seeing that they still wanted to have children, my grandfather made a deal with his sister to let her husband sleep with his wife until she conceived. My dad was born, and then a year or so later my aunt. My grandparents and my great-aunt and uncle made a deal that the last one of the alive would be responsible for telling the family. Then DNA testing became popular, and we realized that the math wasn't mathing, and we asked my grandmother, the last of the 4 alive, what it all meant, and we finally got the backstory. But she would have died without saying a damn thing, leaving us all in the dark. Number 31. A nurse once told me about an old man who, just days before dying, admitted that the name everyone knew him by wasn't his real one. He'd taken his younger brother's identity after the boy died, because their parents always loved the brother more. No one ever found out. He told her like it was nothing, then asked if he could have one last coffee. Number 32. Finding out that I have over 5 half-siblings, not including the one half-brother I always knew about. And the only reason I ever knew about him is because my mom tried going through the process of adopting him when he was a teenager, until he tried to kill me when I was weeks old. A lot of weird stuff in my family, and I'm scared to do any type of DNA test because I do not want to know any more than I've already unwillingly learned. Number 33. Grandpa was one of 6. His brother is on his deathbed, rough shape, not talking much if at all. Family all around him. He kind of sits up and points to his sister, shrugs his shoulders, says, "Well, I will see you next," lays back down, passes away an hour or so later. Sure enough, out of all of them in the room, she dies next. Number 34. My dad, in front of all 5 of my older siblings, said I was his favorite and I was the only one actually going to do anything with my life. My only brother was the only one that thought it was hilarious, and the aftermath with my sisters was not fun in the slightest. Number 35. Not mine, but my coworker's dad would say the craziest stuff when he was on his deathbed. He kept going on about how he was in witness protection because years ago he had stolen money from the mob. They all thought it was the morphine, but lo and behold, after he died, they received a key and instructions to a safety deposit box from the Will people. Turns out the whole thing had been legit after all, and the guy had kept it a secret for decades. I don't know what happened with the money, if they were allowed to keep it or whatever. Number 36. My grandpa confessed to burning the house down with his family still inside for the insurance money. Twice. Fortunately, everyone survived both fires. Number 37. A relative of mine had a weird thing happen at a funeral. Her husband died in a car accident. At his funeral, a bunch of black cars pulled up with people nobody recognized. They marched in, opened the casket, closed it, and turned to the widow. She handed them a briefcase, and they left. Apparently, she looked terrified out of her mind. Years later, on her own deathbed, she confessed to her daughter that her husband had not died in the accident. He'd made it to the hospital. He'd told her that if her Uncle X came to his funeral, she had to give him the briefcase hidden in the wall under the stairs. Do not open it. Do not ask questions. After her death, her daughter found out from old diaries that her mom had mafia connections and had left Italy in a bit of a hurry years before. She had no idea her husband that she met on the other side of the world was involved too. What did you think of these stories? Which one was the most surprising? Leave your opinion in the comments, or share if you also have a story about a disturbing deathbed confession. Don't forget to subscribe. We are a new channel, and we really appreciate your support. We publish stories with new topics multiple times a week. From Reddit Stories Bonanza, we wish you an amazing week.